Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you this morning. We're continuing our studies in the book of Genesis. We're in Genesis, and we're in chapter 44. Actually 45. We're just at the beginning of chapter 45 in Genesis, Genesis 45. Let's read the first verses of this. We started to discuss this somewhat last week, but as we read these verses, I think there may not be any better. There's some great places in the Scripture, but I don't think there's any place better in the Scriptures to observe God's providential working to bring about His desired will. And Joseph explains this to his brothers. When he identified, remember, he's a powerful man in Egypt now. His brothers come there. He finally, after some interaction, he finally identifies himself to them as the brother that they had sold into slavery. But quite amazingly, he takes a positive spin on the thing. I think he could have been mad, he could have been angry, he could have been vengeful. I think most of us probably would have been. And yet Joseph is such a great person that he could see that this actually turned out, even though he went through lots of hardships, it turned out to the overall good. Let's read that again in Genesis 45, beginning verse 1. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out from me." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brethren, "I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live?" And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said to his brethren, "Come near to me, I pray you." And they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath a famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall be neither earing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. And now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, that He hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and a lord of his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt." So we were discussing this last week somewhat, and we'll just comment here briefly, how Joseph saw God's providence at work in this whole ordeal. Now, the question that we were dealing with, just as the class closed last week, is, notice Joseph even said, "God sent me before you." The sinful deeds of the brothers, are they thus excused? They're not responsible. They're not accountable for what they did. What do you think about that? Just comment about that again briefly. Any thoughts? Are you going to hold the brothers accountable? God going to hold the brothers accountable? Monty?
Paul talked about it in the New Testament about how God had raised Pharaoh up when he was talking about people basically had that same notion that, well, there wasn't sin because God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And so therefore Pharaoh was responsible, was the judge of the thing. But he was basically saying we're still responsible for what we do. God may use our sinful activities to bring forth His will into place, but it's not that we're excused for it, it's just He used us anyway.
I think that's the right view. God will bring about His desired will. And in general, His desired will was for the preservation of Abraham's descendants, right? God had made promises through Abraham that ultimately would lead to the birth of Jesus. The promises initially made to Abraham would prevail all the way through to the birth of Jesus. That being the case, Abraham's descendants can't be killed off. They can't die out. God's will is that family tree prevail. So things have to happen to cause that to come to pass. Well, along come Joseph's brothers. They're bad guys. They're really bad guys. They are jealous and mean-spirited, deceptive, conniving, wicked people. And they sell their brother as a slave, which, by the way, is, and I think Matt has made this point to us several times, that's really the definition of slavery, right? Man-stealers. It's not like someone would put themselves into indentured servitude in order to pay off a debt. It's like you steal someone and you sell them That's basically what his brothers did to him. They were man stealers. Those are sins, not to be excused. But even when bad people do bad things, God can, through his providence, turn that to accomplish his desired will. And if you were going to state as a very general principle, what God's desired will was the preservation of Abraham's seed. And he could even use the deeds of those bad guys in order to accomplish this ultimate goal. Matt?
You see, it doesn't matter what man may try to do to undermine what God's plan is either.
Yeah.
Even though they may not have believed that was God's plan, Joseph had revealed it to them about his dream that they would one day bow down to him. Here they are, yeah, we're going to bow down to here we go, we're going to sell him into slavery, we'll never bow down to him.
Yeah.
And here they are, all these years later, bowing down before him.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So a couple of things just from those verses is one, I think, just a really good picture of how God providentially uses things. Whatever, God is going to bring his will to pass, and evil men cannot intervene. They cannot stop it. God's will happen, and he will bring it to pass. And although there were... If we were to point out the miraculous involvement here in the overall story of Joseph, I think really the only miraculous events involved in this was the interpretation of dreams. And he did have a supernatural power to interpret dreams. And he interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker, and he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh. Even before his brothers sold him, he had some revelatory dreams about, as was mentioned, his brothers would bow down to him. But I mean, as far as a supernatural act like walking on the water, or changing water into wine, or any of the kind of miracles that we read about, those kind of miracles are kind of absent in this story. The only supernatural deal in this story is, I think, the dreams. But you still see God bringing to pass his will, and that's a real good explanation of what providence is. God acting in behind the scenes in non-miraculous ways to bring about his will. Now, just a quick application to our day. We talk all the time about the fact that we don't believe that God is empowering men to do supernatural miracles today. We believe the time of supernatural miracles has ended. We believe the Bible explains that they would end, and they have ended. But we still firmly have faith in God's providential working. God still works in the world. God's still active. And so in providential ways, he brings to pass his will. What is his will? Well, if you wanted to boil it down to the simple explanation of what God's will is that you be saved eternally in heaven. He wants to bring many sons to glory, the Scripture says. So his ultimate will is for you to be saved. That's what he wants. And providentially, he works to bring that to pass. So here's guys, I got real sick. Or my loved one got real sick and died. I lost my job. My car got repossessed because I didn't have any money, and everything's going bad for me. Where's God? Well, all of those kind of things God may use. Those are not good things. Those are negative things in a person's lives. But God can use all those negatives. If all of that works together to make you ultimately spiritually stronger, and helps you get more on the road to heaven eternally, then we can say God's providential will is being fulfilled. God's providential will is being carried out. Our problem is we got this tunnel vision, I got this health issue. I got this job issue. And we're focused on the here and now. God's not limited to thinking about here and now. God's thinking about the big picture of eternity and us relative to his big picture. Thoughts or comments? Anybody? All right. Again, we got to be impressed with Joseph. What an amazing person he was, and how he had this positive take on all that had happened. All right, I think that gets us through all of the questions that were asked if you're looking at the study guide on lesson 11. So we keep moving forward here. We know that he sends his brothers back now to get the rest of the family. Obviously, the father has not come yet. There are wives and dependent children still back home. So he says in verse 9, "Haste ye, go up to my father and say to him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me a lord over all Egypt. Come down to me. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all thou hast. And there will I nourish thee. For yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. And ye shall tell my father all the glory in Egypt, and all that ye have seen, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him." All right, so go back and get the rest of the family, he says. Continuing there at verse 16, "And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, Say to thy brethren, This do ye, lade your beast and go. Get you into the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye. Take ye wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Also regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. And the children of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent after this manner." Okay, so I don't know about you, but as I read those verses, and it's just a straightforward telling, no difficulty in understanding the telling of those verses, but it's kind of amazing to me, Pharaoh's reaction to this news about Joseph. And I believe what that would indicate to us one more time is what a great person Joseph was, and what a faithful worker he was, and how efficient he was in carrying out his duties. And Pharaoh loved Joseph for all that he had done, and for all that he was continuing to do. Pharaoh had obviously a very high respect for Joseph. But we're not really surprised about that, because Joseph had shown that both while he was still at home with his father, but he showed that in Potiphar's house, and he showed that when he was a steward in the jail. And so whatever position you put Joseph into, he's going to do his job as good as anybody can do it. And so Pharaoh obviously had super high respect for Joseph. And when he found out that this family matter was involved, he said, you go home right now, and you bring everybody here, and they can have the best that the land of Egypt has to offer. That's a considerable offer if you stop to think about what Pharaoh was offering, but it all goes to his respect for Joseph and his respect for the kind of person Joseph was, a kind of number one right-hand man Joseph had been to. When we get a little later here, we're going to read about how the measures taken by Joseph actually really enriched Pharaoh. Joseph's work in all of this is really turning out good for Pharaoh. And obviously Pharaoh has a deep appreciation for all that. So just read to the end of the chapter there. To his father Joseph sent after this manner 10 asses laden with the goods of Egypt, 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said to them, See ye that ye fall not out by the way. Stop right there. I've got a footnote here that when they fall not out suggests the idea, don't be quarreling among yourselves. No sibling fights on the way, I think is the way to understand that. He knows the past history of his brothers. So see that ye fall not out by the way. And they went up out of Egypt, and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive. He is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived, and Israel said, It is enough. Joseph my son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. All right. So you get this news. Remember, we did a little calculating last week, and we figured it had been 22 years since the brothers had seen Joseph. Obviously, that means it's been 22 years since the father has seen Joseph. And he was deceived into believing that Joseph was dead. Skip back to chapter 37 for a minute. They sent the coat, the brothers sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, remember verse 31, they had dipped the coat in animal blood. And so they presented the coat and said, We have found this. Know ye now whether it be thy son's coat or not? And he knew it, and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured it. And Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, I will go down into my grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. He's fully convinced that Joseph is dead. And his grief and mourning could not have been any more genuine. Well, you know, we use that example to point out how that feelings can be deceptive. What were Jacob's feelings about Joseph? His feelings, absolutely as true and genuine and sincere as they possibly could have been, his feelings were grief and mourning because he believed with all his heart that his son Joseph was dead. But he was wrong, right? That wasn't true. His son was not dead. And we make that point sometimes about trusting our feelings about anything, and especially when it comes to the idea of trusting our feelings about religion. You know, a lot of people, a whole lot of people in our world, if we try to engage in the discussion about religious differences, they just trust their feelings. And if their feelings are okay, then they're okay. And very often we use the illustration of Jacob and Joseph, Jacob's feelings about Joseph's apparent death, just to illustrate the point. You can have the deepest, most heartfelt emotions and be completely wrong. Right? So that's a really good point. And we sort of see that emphasized here again in the verses that we just read. He is so convinced that Joseph's dead, he doesn't believe them. He does not believe them when they come back and say, We have found Joseph. Joseph is alive. He's a governor in Egypt. He's the main man down in Egypt. Jacob's not believing that. No, he's dead. He's dead. And the only thing that seems to convince him is when he saw all these wagon loads of goods that have been sent from Pharaoh. He knew he didn't send enough money down there to bring all this stuff back from Egypt. He didn't have that kind of wealth. They were poverty-stricken now in this famine. And so the appearance of this whole wagon train worth of goods that had been sent to him by Pharaoh convinces him that Joseph must be alive, and he's going to go see him. But his feelings were very strong. Even when presented with contradictory evidence, his feelings were so strong that Joseph was dead. Feelings can be misguided. Thoughts or comments from anybody? Monty?
One thing that might induce them to have a lot of difficulty believing this, it's like, all right, the 10 of you done had me believe in 22 years Joseph's dead. Now you 10 going to come back and tell me he ain't dead. What am I supposed to believe? I can't believe nothing you tell me. But like I said, then he sees the evidence they brought back with him, he believes. But don't you know that's going to be a lot of hard explaining to do, and dreading the grief and consequences is going to come. You know, Joseph is apparently being okay with him, and he's not being particularly harsh to him. Just think what dear old dad's going to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're going to have to face the concern that their father now is going to jump on them and give them all kind of grief for what they've done to their brothers. A little later, when we read about Jacob giving final messages to all the sons, he kind of lays out to them some of their flaws and their faults. But yeah, they got a lot of the brothers. So, it's kind of following Monty's train of thought there. Would they feel like, well, we're clear in this matter now? This is, I think we actually did a good thing to sell Joseph. I don't think they feel that way. I think they realize, I think they've come fully face to face with the horribleness of their sin against Joseph. And even though it's worked out for Joseph in the long run, Joseph paid a big price to get to where he is, and he suffered a lot of hardship. And so they should not feel, or should we ever feel, that even though we're forgiven, that means it was no big deal what we did. I think that we have to realize that sin bears consequences. Even when the sin is forgiven, we often bear long-term consequences of the wrongs that we did. And Joseph's brethren, they're going to deal with this. Even when, skipping ahead a little bit, when Jacob dies, they're afraid that after the death of their father, now Joseph will work us over. Now Joseph will get his vengeance on us since our father's dead. So it's clear this did not leave them. And their concern and guilt over all that had happened lingered with them, as often does our sin. Sin bears consequences. Okay. Let's begin into chapter 46, if there's no other comments. Anybody? In chapter 46, verse 1, and Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke unto Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. And I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Our author asks this question, why did Jacob need that kind of reassurance about going to Egypt? Any thoughts on that? Why would God need to present this vision to Jacob about going down to Egypt? Monty?
He'd been given the promise by God. Talk about the promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is going to be the land you're going to inherit. This is where you're going to be. Your descendants is going to be here. This is your place. And so he's been given instructions that this is where you need to be. Well, now all of a sudden he's told you need to go to Egypt. And so he's got to have this wondering in his mind. The boys say I'm supposed to go down here. But God said we're all going to be here. So what do I need to do? So he's bound to be hesitant in the matter. Even though he knows physically, he has a spiritual aspect. He's typically always referred to in good ways spiritually. And so he's got this longer vision in mind than just we're all starving to death right here. So he's got to have reassurance that it's okay for you to go down here. I'm going to take you down there and things are going to work out. I'm going to take care of you. And you and your family is going to wind up coming back.
I think that's it. I think it goes to the fact that he was fully aware of the promise of God that the land of Canaan would be their place. Well, I'm leaving my place now that God promised to give me. Should I be doing that? Because God promised here, and yet now I'm pulling up stakes and taking everything to Egypt. So I do think that was probably behind it. Dan, is that your thought on? Do you have a thought, Dan? Okay. So God assures him, I'll go down with you. I'll surely bring you up again, verse 4. What does the last phrase in verse 4 mean? Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Anybody? Josh?
I think it's referring to, he'll be together when he dies.
Yeah, I think that's the. I think another version is Joseph shall close thine eyes. And, you've seen that in movies, somebody dies, but their eyes are open and they close their eyes, after they've died. And so I think that's an expression.
It kind of makes me think maybe a reassurance that they will have time together as father and son again.
True. You'll see him before you die. All right. I think that's exactly right. All right. Now, in chapter 46, it goes into a long listing of the various sons of Jacob and their descendants who go with them down to Egypt. Skip down to verse 46. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, beside Jacob's sons, wives, and all the souls, were 66. And the sons of Joseph, which were born in Egypt, were 2 souls. And all the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. So there's a little bit of accounting there. And sometimes, and you may have read some of this variously, there's some argument about how do you count the descendants of Jacob who went to Egypt, and there's more than just this reference to the number. And the question is, how do we harmonize the numbers? We won't dive off into that right now, but just make this observation: they were a fairly small band, however you count it. They were a fairly small band of people who went down into Egypt. About 70 people. Now, in the course of time, they're going to grow into a number of people that have got Pharaoh concerned. There are so many of them. When you get into the book of Exodus, there are so many of them that Pharaoh is worried if we get engaged in a war and these Israelites turn on us to side with our enemies, we're in trouble. And that's when the Pharaoh of that time, which is a long time after this, but the Pharaoh of that time begins to issue rules about their work conditions and the rules about kill all your boy babies when they're born, because it's worried about population growth among the Israelites. They have grown so much in the course of time in Egypt. Well, that's actually fulfillment of a lot of things, but it's specifically a fulfillment of verse 3. I will there make of thee a great nation. And he did, right? They became a great nation of people. They went down there as pretty much just a handful, a small tribe of 70 people. They come out a great nation, and so that promise is fulfilled. Any thoughts? Anybody? Keep reading there at verse 28. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. By the way, the land of Goshen, we've studied that in the past, but that was the prime agricultural area of Egypt. I mean, if you wanted the best place for pasturing animals, for growing crops and all that sort of thing, land of Goshen is where you want to be. And so again, this speaks to how much Pharaoh appreciated Joseph. He gave his family the primo spot in the land of Goshen. And Joseph, verse 29, Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him, and he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. And Joseph said unto his brethren and to his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, my brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are coming to me. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, or probably the word there is better, livestock. When we think of, well, the King James actually says cattle, but when we think of herds and flocks back in that time were sheep and goats. And so probably not cattle, as the King James says. Their trade hath been to feed livestock. And they have brought their flocks and their herds and all they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, what is your occupation? That ye shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers. that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Okay, so that particular trade was not favored in Egypt. And so but you got to have it, right? I mean, you got to have agriculture, you got to have crops and herds. And so tell Pharaoh that you are shepherds, because they don't really like to be around shepherds. And that will assure that he'll put you off over here in the land of Goshen, and you can do your thing. And there's an idea there of sort of keeping separation from the Egyptians, which actually would, again, be along the lines of what God desired concerning keeping the seed of Abraham distinct toward the ultimate fulfillment of Jesus being born to that lineage. Any thoughts or comments?
They had basically the Egyptians, they probably wouldn't have been true to God, and with their idols and so forth, which they affected them, even as you'll see later, later on, it did affect them later.
Exactly right. The Egyptians were polytheists. They had a god for just about everything. And so, as Gordon mentioned, if they had intermingled with the Egyptians, very likely they would have lost track, although I think they did somewhat, but lose track of God and the one true God. But anyway, there's a sort of a natural device here to keep them separated from the Egyptians, to keep them distinct. All right, any other thoughts? Well, again, this is all pretty straightforward stuff, isn't it? Not hard to understand. I think it's a real interesting narrative, don't you, how it just reads. Let's keep reading there in chapter 47. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all they have are come out of the land of Canaan. Behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? They said to Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover to Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and thy brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. Again, not hard to understand, but 2 times it's mentioned Jacob blessed Pharaoh, verse 7. And also, verse 10, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now, let me get that straight. Pharaoh is probably the richest man in the world at that exact time. How does a poor fellow like Jacob's come down there and everything he's got, I mean, is visible. I mean, this is how much I've got. Here's Pharaoh who owns the world. How does a relatively poor man like Jacob bless the potentially richest man in the world in Pharaoh? Money.
I suspect it's like the phrase we quite often use when somebody does something and say, God bless you. So he's asking for the blessings of God on Pharaoh for the good that Pharaoh's doing them. If he's poor, maybe he don't have a whole lot of stuff to give him, but he can ask for blessings of God for him. And what more could we really give somebody what greater gift can we give somebody than to try to invoke the blessings of God?
Okay, I think that's a fair explanation. I like it, that he's just blessing in the sense that God bless you, as we would often say. There's also another way the word bless is used. Sometimes to bless someone just means to show adoration for. Look at Psalm 34, verse 1. Psalm 34, verse 1 says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. I will bless the Lord, David says. Well, how does a mortal man like David bless the Lord, God, creator of all the universe? Well, when used in that context, it simply means to express adoration toward. And so we bless God when we just show our praise and honor to Him. When God blesses us, the use of the term in that sense is to bestow benefit toward. And so God blesses us. In other words, we receive benefits from God. God blesses us and we receive benefits in that process. We bless God in return, which just simply, we don't have anything. We have nothing to offer God that He needs. But we bless Him when we return our praise and adoration to Him. So it may be, I think either explanation works here. When it says that Jacob blessed Pharaoh, it could mean, as Monty said, he just said along the lines of, may my God bless you. Or it may be that he was just showing his adoration toward Pharaoh himself. Either way would work, I think, in explanation here. But it's not some sort of a contradiction. So here's this poor guy, and he's supposed to be blessing the richest man on earth. We can understand that expression. Let's see, what else we got here? In a longer part of the reading here, maybe we got time just to read it, and we can just comment about it briefly and be ready to move on next week. The rest of this chapter goes on to say how Joseph's work was really enriching Pharaoh. So let's read it real quickly, beginning at 13, chapter 47, verse 13. And there was no bread in the land, and the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they had bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, and all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence, for the money faileth? Joseph said, give your cattle. I will give you for your cattle, if money fail. And they brought their cattle into Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for their horses, for their flocks, for the cattle of the herds, and for the asses. And he fed them with bread for all their cattle that year. And when that year was ended, they came to him the second year and said to him, why we will not hide from my Lord how that our money is spent. My Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in sight of my Lord but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh, and we will give and will give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the border of Egypt even to the other end thereof. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them, wherefore they sold not their lands. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your lands for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the 5th part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own, for seed for the field, and for your food, for them that are of your households, and for food for your little ones. And they said, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it law over the land of Egypt unto this day that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. So, now, I'm just asking you, what do you think about Joseph as a business manager here? He's a pretty good business manager. And remember now, during the 7 years of plenty which had come before, he was gathering up toward this famine, right? And so they were under a mandatory assessment. What was it, 20%, wasn't it? For 7 years, they were given 20% of their harvest, and Joseph was storing it up. Now the famine hits, he starts selling back to them what they had given. And so he starts selling back to them the grain that had been sort of tax assessed. I guess you could call it like a tax assessment. Now he starts selling it back to them. They spend all their money. Pharaoh's not got all the money. He got all the money. All the money is Egypt's. He is in possession of every last cent. Now they say, we got no money. And he said, okay, I'll take your livestock in exchange for food this year. Now he gets all the livestock, which, by the way, in that time was a real element of wealth. More so than we would think, because that was just a measure of wealth in that time. Now he's got all the animals. They come back to him again and say, we don't have any money, we don't have any animals. We just got ourselves and our land. And he said, okay. And so he takes all the land of Egypt and acquires it to Pharaoh. And these people basically become the indentured servants of Pharaoh. And now he establishes a standing law. From now on out, Pharaoh gets 1/5 of everything you make. 20%. 20% of everything you make comes into the coffers of Pharaoh. Well, when you think about that, this Pharaoh has become enormously wealthy through the work of Joseph. There's a likelihood that before all this happened, Pharaoh was a powerful man, but he may not have had consolidated power over all this area. It may have been that prior to this, it was sort of like, we hear in history about the city-state authoritarian sort of arrangement, where there were like local tribal leaders. And in this area, there was this tribal leader, and in this area, there was another, and in that area, another. And maybe this Pharaoh was sort of the head chief. There were other chiefs, but he was maybe more powerful than the others. But now, he has become the ultimate. He owns everything. And it all goes to Joseph. Joseph has been the ultimate manager of these affairs and everything that went with it. Let's stop right there. We're just out of time, and we'll pick up the last verses there, verse 47. Monty.
I think an interesting thing about this is he's done it in such a way, even though he's got everything that people had, and including them, they're the slaves now, and he's done it in such a way that they like it and appreciate it for it, because they said, you saved our life.
Yeah. So take everything I got and charge me a 20% tax for the rest of my life, and I love you for it. You saved my life. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Pretty amazing. Thanks, everybody.